This is going to be one of my videos in my extended Bible series, where I delve into the Bible in detail, looking at each section and breaking down the prophecies, the visions, the stories and the accounts with what we know historically and what science has discovered for us, as well as what the Bible itself tells us. If this is the sort of video you're interested in, please like and share it with your friends. The more discussion we have, the better. Any thoughts you have, please leave in the comments. And if you're that sort of person who likes to stay up to date with things, please consider subscribing to the channel. Apart from that, I hope you enjoyed the video.
The sons of Jacob are famous in a way few others in the Old Testament are, having been remembered in the musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. The story initially paints the brothers as jealous of Joseph, and makes it seem as though Joseph was chosen because of favour. However, earlier chapters mention some other deeds done by Jacob's sons that suggest there's more to his brood's sins than just jealousy and spite. Many may paint the patriarchy as full of nepotism, and it certainly might be later down the line, but it's less so in Genesis. But with all that in mind, I shall shine a spotlight on the sons of Jacob that Lord Lloyd Webber failed to cover in the play. So to look closer, the questions I'll be asking are: what were Joseph's brothers like? How much nepotism is there in the house of Jacob? And how does God view their actions? Whilst I know the main story is covered in play form, the original source, I'm pretty sure, is a combination of stories and accounts. The fact that some houses are mentioned and in theory shouldn't be known by the people at the time implies historians adding the information to give context or bonus connections. But this again is a time where records and oral traditions tend to overlap, and as a result accuracy is going to be a bit blurred. But we're taking this practically as gospel, so let's dive in. Now we know that all of Jacob's sons were born in Padan Aram, where he was working for Laban and building up his material wealth. Strangely enough, the first story that involves his sons as individuals starts off with someone who is rarely mentioned again, that being his daughter. We only know about her as a child of Leah, her seventh child, and being Jacob's 11th child by all his wives. The one thing that stands out in the text about her is that she caught the eye of a young Hivite man. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as my wife." It's a common trope in stories that when two people fall in love, they almost immediately fall into bed. In this case, however, this sounds like a very one-sided rush of affection. And the text isn't afraid to highlight that by labelling it as rape. By modern standards, it looks bad, and clearly by the standards of the day, he doesn't sit with anyone, least of all her big brothers. When the men of Jacob's house learned of what had happened, all were horrified. It's never said Jacob agreed to the marriage. His sons said they would agree to the marriage and allow a big interbreeding of the houses on the sole condition that all the Hivites become circumcised. This was agreed to, much to their cost. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, 2 sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. Some might say a cowardly attack on an unsuspecting foe, and a war crime by many modern standards. I can't deny, however, the cunning of it. It's a bit like hitting someone in the crotch, cutting their throat. But the lone nature of the blow was compounded by the overzealousness of the action. Putting the rapists to the sword and taking their sister home would seem reasonable, even by modern standards. The father and any men that got in the way, maybe you could allow that. But the whole city, and then looting it. No wonder Jacob told them that they had put him in a bad position with the rest of the tribes. And when you're in a bad position against people who presumably have armies, you have to get out there. They were forced to leave and find somewhere else to settle. It's possible the false gods they were ordered to dispose of were the items of material value that were looted from the city. It's quite probable, doesn't give any other context to it. But now we come to the story that Lloyd Webber made a big song and dance of, quite literally. It all starts with Joseph getting an amazing coat from father Jacob. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Moving over the ornate robe not being accurate in the play, which, bear in mind the translation, doesn't explain what ornate means in this context, and further implies it's a record, not a story. Any bard will have given it a huge paragraph of information. It's clear from before this passage, Joseph doesn't have the best relationship with his brothers. He tells them they're doing something wrong before this particular section of the Bible. He then gets given a very nice robe, and his brothers were clearly jealous of the affection their father gave him. This isn't a good omen by any means, particularly considering the older brothers have shown to be incredibly vindictive. When Joseph starts mentioning his dreams about things bowing down to him, like whole sheaves of corn bowing down to his sheaf of corn, and the stars, sun, and moon bowing down to him, this definitely doesn't help his standing amongst his siblings. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. His later dream, being on a similar theme, and Jacob taking heed of it, may well have made his other sons feel as though the fancy robe had gone straight to Joseph's head. Clearly, they felt he was trying to usurp the position of patriarch. As we all know, the story goes on to tell how they trick him, steal his robe, throw him in a well, and then sell him as a slave. It's clear they originally intended to kill him, but fortunately his eldest brother, Reuben, knew that it wouldn't be a good idea. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him in the cistern here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. It's unclear what his intentions were, since he prevented his brothers from killing Joseph, and yet allowed them to throw him in the well. He may have been intending to gain favour by rescuing Joseph, or possibly just leaving him in the well for God to deal with as he saw fit. We may never know, since he was not pleased when his brothers sold him. So, could be lingering affection for his little brother? It could be he was hoping for his own sign to come. But personally, I think this is where the evil of man is harder to divine than any evil given by otherworldly powers. The brother responsible for selling Joseph was Judah. I'll have a bit more to say about him than the play does, so let's delve into that part of the story. After Jacob goes into mourning, Judah leaves and finds a wife amongst the Canaanites, by whom he has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Their story revolves around a woman named Tamar, who was originally married to But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife, and fulfill your duty as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. This sounds eerily similar to the antics of one particular English monarch. The only difference is Onan didn't take to his brother's wife and refused to impregnate her. His reasons were that he knew the child would not be considered his, as it was intended to be his brother's, so it wouldn't be continuing his line. Whilst it may sound selfish, the text, however, points out that he beds her whilst avoiding finishing. You may think, what's more that? Well, since contraceptives haven't been invented at that point, and it only takes sexual contact to transmit diseases, his actions were adding risk without a reward, without the chance of growing the population. Since that was considered wicked, it's safe to suggest that was probably unfaithful and slept around, further increasing the risk, hence why both of them were seen as wicked by God. This may be considered high-handed to some, but I think it just proves my theory that the control of disease is the reason for fidelity, and quite possibly for marriage as well. Now, Tamar was instructed to live as a widow until the youngest son was of age, but she soon took on the guise of a prostitute to tempt Judah. He offers a good payment for her services in the form of a goat. Though it was her, obviously. But since he didn't have the goat with him at the time, she suggested an IOU of sorts. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. Whilst not commonly practiced amongst service givers of any sort, this IOU came with honour attached, and also came with a risk to him since she basically took his ID. It's a bit like when I was in Australia. I've heard of some places where we do our 88 days, our regional work, they take our passports. So we are honour bound to stick to the job. I never worked at one of those places, but it means we can't go anywhere. And in this case, this is particularly important since when her pregnancy was discovered and she was sentenced to burn, which is another form of controlling disease, she showed the items to shame Judah into revealing he was the father of the child. Blackmail to get a place in the house of Jacob, or ensuring that she had children before passing the age of childbirth. Since neither her father's wealth nor her age is ever mentioned, it could be either. But since she was spared from the flames, it's likely God saw her bid for children as righteous, especially since Judah didn't take her to his bed again, and presumably didn't give her his son Sheol. Whilst Joseph's story continues on, I think what we've covered so far gives us the answers to the questions. So let's look back at them. What were Joseph's brothers like? For the most part, they seem vindictive and prone to taking matters into their own hands, like deceiving and killing the Hivites for raping their sister, intending to kill Joseph for being the favourite, and when they were talked out of it, they sold him as a slave to get some money. You may be thinking, not all of them are bad. Look at Reuben. He tried to stop Joseph from being killed, and Judah was leery about it as well. But they too had their shortcomings. Reuben possibly wanting to claim his father's affection for saving Joseph, and Judah being tricked into sleeping with his daughter-in-law when neither of his sons gave her a child. How much nepotism is there in this household? Since Jacob gave Joseph the ornate robe, most people could assume that it's a symbol of the patriarchy passing to him ahead of his brothers, which is quite a big thing since he was the 11th son. This wouldn't have sat well with the brothers, and when Joseph told them of his dreams of many people bowing before him, that would make it seem like he was aspiring to rule and he was just rubbing it in. This wouldn't be unheard of, since Jacob himself had stolen the patriarchy from his older brother Esau, thanks to his mother having the favour for him. So it's possible he too, showing favouritism towards Joseph, would have rubbed his sons up the wrong way. But it could just be that he felt closer to the first child of his most beloved Rachel. How does God view their actions? We get an idea of how God views their actions later in the story, which I'll cover next week because that'll make this video way too long. But the example given here with Judah is good enough to serve as a reference. His two older sons both committed wicked acts and failed to give Tamar her children. When she bedded the father instead, he was forced to stand by his honour to keep her alive. This suggests God is trying to teach them to take responsibility for all of his actions, both in his treatment of Joseph by selling the slave and Tamar by giving her son after son. With Jacob's grief over the supposed death of Joseph, putting him out of action for a long time, all of the brothers would have had to step up and do most of the work to provide for the household. Judah being absent was given his own trial, but none of them got off scot-free. In short, God doesn't look on them well. So when we look at this story, we see the sons of Jacob don't seem like good role models for the nation of Israel. True, they are jealous at Joseph for being the favourite by their father, but throwing him in a well for merely explaining a dream is not a good way to go about it. It may look a bit that he's dreaming of ruling over them, but all the same. Whilst remembering the burning of the Hivite city, those responsible may have lost patriarchy because of it. So Simeon and Levi may have lost their chance to be patriarch. But the others, whilst they didn't kill Joseph, their sins against him may well lead them to bowing down before him in the future anyway. If any of us know the story correctly, then it's likely that's going to happen. As some might say, the path one meets his destiny on is often the very same one he takes to avoid it.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching and God bless.